I stared at the bank statement in my trembling hands, watching Grace count out $100 bills for her weekend spa trip, while our father lay in his hospital bed, unable to afford the treatment that could save his life. The numbers didn't lie. She'd been receiving $3,000 every month from our grandmother's secret trust fund, money that could have paid for Dad's cancer treatment 10 times over. But that wasn't even the worst part of her betrayal. My name is Amanda Foster. I'm 28, and I teach middle school math in a cramped classroom where half the calculators don't work. Most days I love my job despite the terrible pay and the occasional flying eraser. But sitting at our family's dinner table that spring evening, watching my sister Grace glow like she'd swallowed sunshine, I felt something shift in our carefully balanced world. Grace had news. Big news. She stood up, her blonde hair catching the light from Mom's ancient chandelier, and held out her left hand. The diamond ring sparkled like a disco ball. "David proposed," she squealed, bouncing on her toes like she was still 16 instead of 25. The room exploded. Mom started crying those happy tears that made her mascara run. Dad jumped up to shake David's hand so hard I thought he might dislocate something. Even our ancient golden retriever, Murphy, started barking from pure excitement. Me? I smiled and hugged her tight, genuinely happy for my little sister. Grace had always been the special one in our family, the pretty one, the charming one, the one who could walk into any room and make everyone forget their problems. Well, not everyone could be the star. "Tell us everything," Mom demanded, already mentally planning what seemed like Grace's coronation rather than just an engagement party. Grace launched into the story with theatrical flair. David had proposed during a sunset dinner at the most expensive restaurant in the city. He'd hired a violinist. There were rose petals. The whole production probably cost more than I made in a month, but David's family had money, serious money. Then Grace dropped the real bombshell. "We're thinking a June wedding next year," she said, clasping her hands together. "Something elegant, romantic. David's parents are expecting something really special. And honestly," she paused for dramatic effect, "I've dreamed of a fairy tale wedding my entire life." The numbers started flowing. Venue rental, catering, flowers, photography, dress, cake, band. Grace had clearly been planning this wedding since she was 12, down to the exact shade of ivory for the table linens. Dad's face went through several interesting color changes as the total climbed toward $180,000. $180,000. I watched my parents exchange that look married couples perfect after decades together. The look that said, "How exactly are we supposed to pay for this?" Dad's construction. Business was doing okay, but not fairy tale wedding okay. Mom's part-time bookkeeping job barely covered groceries some months. Grace must have noticed their expressions because her eyes filled with tears. Real ones this time. "I know it's a lot," she whispered, "but David's family is expecting something grand. His cousin had this amazing wedding last year, and his mom keeps showing me pictures." Her voice cracked slightly. "I just want to fit in with them. I want them to think I'm good enough for their son." That's when Grace revealed her true superpower. Not just being beautiful or charming, but making everyone around her want to solve her problems. Watching my parents' worried faces transform into determined expressions was like watching magic happen. Dad straightened his shoulders. "We'll figure something out, sweetheart. Every girl deserves her dream wedding." But I could see the math didn't work. Their savings account held maybe $15,000 if we were being generous. Even with some help from David's family, there was a massive gap between dreams and reality. That's when I opened my mouth and changed everything. "I can help," I heard myself saying. "I've got some savings and I could probably get a loan." Grace's face lit up like Christmas morning. She threw her arms around me, smelling like expensive perfume and possibility. "Really? Oh my God, Amanda, you're the best sister in the entire world. I promise I'll pay you back as soon as we get settled after the honeymoon." Looking back now, I should have paid attention to how quickly she said yes. The wedding planning started 3 weeks later, and I should have seen the red flags flapping in the wind like surrender banners. But Grace had this way of making everything feel urgent and magical at the same time. "Amanda, you have to come with me to try on dresses," she'd call, breathless with excitement. "The boutique only had one appointment left this month." One appointment? At a shop where the cheapest dress cost more than my monthly rent. I found myself sitting in an overstuffed chair, watching my sister parade around in gowns that cost $8,000. $8,000 for one day. The saleswoman kept pushing champagne and compliments while Grace spun in front of mirrors like she was auditioning for a fairy tale. "This one," Grace announced, stopping in front of a dress that looked like it was sewn by angels and priced by demons. "This is the one." The price tag made my vision blur. But Grace's face was radiant, and she kept saying how this was her one special day, how David's family would be watching, how she needed to look perfect. I signed the credit card slip with hands that barely trembled. After all, she'd promised to pay me back. Then came the venue upgrades. The original reception hall was beautiful, but Grace discovered it had the same carpet as David's cousin's wedding. Same carpet. Suddenly, we needed a different venue that cost $4,000 more. "I can't walk down the aisle knowing everyone's thinking about Jennifer's wedding," Grace explained, tears pooling in her eyes. "You understand, right?" I understood debt. I was getting intimately acquainted with it. The catering required upgrades, too. The basic package was lovely, but Grace learned that David's parents expected lobster. Not just any lobster, Maine lobster, for 200 guests. Because apparently serving chicken at a wedding was social suicide in David's family circles. Every week brought new financial emergencies that somehow became my emergencies. The flowers weren't seasonal enough. The photographer's package didn't include engagement photos. The band couldn't play the specific song from David's parents' anniversary party. Each crisis came with Grace's trademark promise: "I'll pay you back as soon as we're settled." My savings account died first. Then I maxed out my credit cards. Finally, I took out a personal loan that made my stomach hurt every time I thought about the interest rate. But the family praised my generosity. Mom kept telling everyone how lucky Grace was to have such a devoted sister. Dad would pat my shoulder and say I was really something special for helping make Grace's dreams come true. Grace's gratitude felt like sunshine. She'd hug me tight and whisper how she couldn't do this without me, how I was the best sister in the world, how she'd never forget what I was doing for her. The wedding was everything Grace had dreamed of and everything my bank account had nightmares about. She looked absolutely stunning. David's family seemed appropriately impressed. Everyone danced and laughed and celebrated like money grew on trees. During her reception speech, Grace thanked everyone who made her special day possible. She mentioned David's parents, her own parents, the wedding party, even the florist. She didn't mention me. Well, maybe she forgot. Weddings are overwhelming, right? But then life had other plans for our family's happiness. 1 year later, Dad collapsed during our annual 4th of July barbecue. 1 minute he was flipping burgers and complaining about the neighbors' loud music. The next minute he was on the ground, gray-faced and struggling to breathe. The emergency room became our second home. Tests, scans, specialists, worried conversations in hallways that smelled like disinfectant and fear. Aggressive cancer. The words hit like a physical punch. The oncologist explained treatment options in that careful way doctors use when they're trying to be hopeful but realistic. Insurance would cover most costs, but there was a gap. $8,000 for experimental therapy that could significantly improve his prognosis. $8,000. The same amount Grace had spent on her wedding dress. I sat in my car after that appointment, calculating numbers that didn't want to add up. My credit cards were still maxed out from wedding expenses. My personal loan. Payments ate up most of my disposable income. But this was Dad's life we were talking about. I called Grace that evening, expecting her to finally step up. Surely facing our father's mortality would trigger some sense of family responsibility. "Oh my God, Amanda," She sobbed into the phone. "This is terrible. Poor Dad. Poor all of us. Grace, we need $8,000 for his treatment." Silence stretched between us like a chasm. "I wish I could help," she finally whispered, "but we're completely broke. The wedding debt is killing us. David and I are barely making ends meet." Broke. Grace and David, who lived in a gorgeous apartment and drove matching luxury cars, were broke. "Maybe you could ask some of your teacher friends," Grace suggested, "or start a GoFundMe. David's family might contribute something small." Something small for my father's life. I swallowed my disbelief and started the humiliating process of begging extended family for money, aunts, uncles, cousins, anyone who might spare a few $100s. I picked up extra tutoring jobs, teaching spoiled rich kids who complained about homework while I calculated how their hourly rates could save my father's life. Meanwhile, Grace's social media told a different story. Expensive restaurant dinners, weekend getaways, shopping trips that looked anything but broke. When I asked about these posts, Grace got defensive. "Those are little treats David pays for. He says I need something to help me cope with the stress of Dad's illness. You don't understand the pressure I'm under." The pressure she was under, while I worked 60-hour weeks and survived on ramen noodles. Then Grace showed up to Sunday dinner wearing a purse that cost more than most people's monthly salary. When I pulled her aside, she broke down crying. "It was a gift," she insisted. "David surprised me with it because I've been so sad about Dad. Everyone expects me to be perfect all the time, Amanda. Do you know how exhausting it is being the favorite daughter? Having to keep up appearances when everything's falling apart? Exhausting." Being loved and supported was exhausting for Grace, but the worst part wasn't her selfishness or her excuses. The worst part was how I kept believing her promises might actually mean something this time, until I discovered exactly how much those promises were worth. My desperation led me to places I never thought I'd go, like sitting in our family lawyer's stuffy office, pretending I needed help understanding grandmother's will while fishing for information about Grace's mysterious financial stability. Mr. Henderson had handled our family's legal affairs for 20 years. He knew me as the responsible granddaughter, the one who visited grandmother every Sunday until she passed. That relationship bought me enough trust for him to answer careful questions. "Your grandmother was very specific about her wishes," he said, adjusting his glasses. "She wanted to ensure Grace's future was secure." Those words hit differently than they should have. Not both granddaughters, just Grace. "What exactly did that mean?" I asked, trying to sound casual while my heart hammered against my ribs. Henderson hesitated. Then he pulled out a file that changed everything. The trust fund documents spelled out the truth in black and white. $3,000 monthly starting on Grace's 21st birthday. 4 years of payments, over $144,000. $144,000. While I'd been drowning in debt for her wedding, Grace had been collecting enough money to pay for the entire celebration herself. While our father lay in a hospital bed, Grace had been sitting on enough cash to fund his treatment 20 times over. The room spun slightly as the math crystallized in my mind. Every sleepless night I'd spent worrying about credit card payments. Every humiliating conversation with relatives begging for Dad's treatment money. Every sacrifice I'd made while Grace played the victim. All unnecessary. Completely, utterly unnecessary. I drove home in a daze, the trust fund papers burning like evidence in my passenger seat. The betrayal felt physical, like someone had reached into my chest and rearranged my organs. But wait, it gets worse. That evening was another family dinner, and Grace arrived looking appropriately tragic. She'd perfected this wounded bird routine, complete with red-rimmed eyes and trembling lips. "I feel so helpless," she whispered to our parents. "Watching Dad suffer, knowing I can't do anything to help. If only I had money, I'd give everything to make him better." She actually said that, with a straight face, while sitting on a fortune. I watched our parents comfort her, praising her tender heart and telling her that her emotional support was just as valuable as financial help. Dad even patted her hand and said she was his sweet girl for caring so much. The performance was flawless, Academy Award worthy. That's when I dropped the bombshell. "Actually, Grace," I said, pulling out the trust fund documents, "you do have money, quite a lot of it." The silence that followed could have powered a small city. Grace's face went through more changes than a kaleidoscope. Shock, fear, calculation, and finally, desperate damage control. "I can explain," she stammered, but her voice had lost that practiced victim quiver. Mom grabbed the papers with shaking hands. Dad read over her shoulder, his face darkening with each line. $144,000? Mom's voice cracked. "You've had this money for 4 years?" Grace's excuses came fast and frantic. The trust was for emergencies only. She'd forgotten about it during stressful times. She was protecting the family from feeling obligated to her wealth. Each lie sounded more desperate than the last. But the numbers don't lie, and families have long memories for betrayal. "You let Amanda go into debt for your wedding," Dad said quietly. The quiet anger was scarier than yelling. "You let her sacrifice everything while you sat on a fortune. You've been claiming poverty while our father needed treatment," I added, surprised by how steady my voice sounded. "Playing victim while holding the solution." Grace's true character finally showed itself. Not the sweet, overwhelmed daughter, but someone who believed her happiness was worth more than everyone else's sacrifice. The trust fund money went to Dad's treatment, of course. Legal pressure and family shame forced Grace's cooperation. But some betrayals crack foundations that can never be fully repaired. The Golden Daughter's crown had finally tarnished beyond recognition. Dad's treatment started 3 weeks later. The experimental therapy that Grace's secret fortune finally paid for. I drove him to those first appointments, watching him joke with nurses while poison dripped into his veins to fight the poison already there. "You know what's funny?" he said during one session, gesturing at the IV bag. "Your sister keeps apologizing like she accidentally broke my favorite mug instead of lying about having enough money to buy the whole damn kitchen." Dad's sense of humor stayed intact, even when his hair didn't. Grace tried calling me exactly once after the dinner table explosion. She wanted to explain her side and help me understand the pressure she'd been under. I listened for about 30 seconds before hanging up. Some conversations aren't worth having. The family dynamics shifted like tectonic plates. Mom stopped making excuses for Grace's behavior. Dad stopped calling her his sweet girl. Even Murphy seemed less enthusiastic when Grace visited, which honestly felt like the universe's way of keeping score. Grace's marriage started showing cracks, too. Turns out David's family had some opinions about trust fund deception and medical emergencies. Money problems have a way of revealing character, and Grace's character needed some serious renovation work. The really satisfying part? Grace had to get a real job. Apparently, playing victim doesn't pay well in the current economy. She landed something in retail, which meant dealing with actual customers instead of family members who enabled her princess complex. Dad's treatment worked. The experimental therapy bought him years instead of months. Every clear scan felt like winning the lottery, except better because we'd actually earned this luck through honesty instead of deception. Grace still shows up to family gatherings sometimes. She sits quietly now, no longer the center of attention. The Golden Daughter crown doesn't fit the same way after everyone's seen what's underneath it. I paid off my debts eventually. Took 2 years of tutoring wealthy kids who complained about homework while I calculated freedom 1 hour at a time. But debt has an end point when you stop accumulating it for other people's fairy tales. Some betrayals teach you exactly who deserves your sacrifice and who just expects it. Grace taught me the difference between family loyalty and enabling selfishness. Dad hugged me after his last treatment session. "You saved my life twice," he said. "Once with the money, once with the truth." The math finally added up perfectly. Grace's lies minus family enabling equals justice. Sometimes the best endings aren't happy ones, they're honest ones.